everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into one of Shakespeare's most, well, intense plays today, Othello. Jealousy, betrayal, some really bad choices. And at the heart of it all, this idea of appearance versus reality.
Yeah, it's like all that glitters is not gold. Right. Othello takes us deep into how what we see can totally fool us.
Totally. And Othello himself is kind of playing this game, too. He makes himself out to be this huge hero,
Right.
but that actually makes him easier to manipulate.
That's what makes Othello relevant, even now. We've got tons of great analysis, even some juicy quotes. So let's jump into Act 1, Scene 3. Othello's, he's laying it on thick for Desdemona.
Right. He's telling her about all his crazy adventures, and she's hooked. Our sources even say she devours his stories, battles, sieges, all kinds of wild stuff.
Devours. That's the key word. It's like she's not just listening. She's like consuming this whole image he's building up.
He's giving her this very specific version of himself, and she's buying it. But then he takes it even further, right? He starts using these religious words, pilgrimage, almost like he's some kind of saint.
Exactly. It's almost like he's trying to convince himself as much as her, which is where the problem starts. This image, it's impressive, but it's not the whole picture. And that makes their relationship, not very stable.
Like it's not built on really knowing each other, more like an ideal.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And that's where Iago steps in, like the puppet master.
Oh man, Iago. He's the master at twisting how things look, right? Like when Cassia just holds Desdemona's hand.
And he spins that into this whole thing about her being unfaithful. The crazy thing is, Iago gets that Othello, under all the bragging, is really insecure.
Wait, really? He seems so confident, so sure of himself.
He's a Moor in Venice, the outsider.
Yeah.
Always having to prove himself. And he's older, maybe thinking, does she really love me? Iago sees that and uses it.
So even though he acts strong, those insecurities make him a target. Kind of like those influencers, perfect online, but maybe falling apart in real life.
Yeah, exactly. Iago pokes at those doubts, makes them bigger and bigger until Othello doubts everything. He goes from confident hero to, consumed by suspicion, all because of a few well-placed words.
It's like that saying, a whisper can be louder than a shout, especially when it hits your biggest fear. But what about Desdemona? Is she just along for the ride?
Oh, no, not at all. Remember what she says? "'Twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wonders pitiful," describing Othello's stories,
Yeah, those lines always felt like pure admiration to me, like she's in awe of all he's done.
She is. But it's not just that, right? It's like she's fascinated by the idea of him, the hero he's made himself out to be. She even wishes she was him, which means maybe she's more in love with that image than the real guy.
Wow, you're right. She's got this perfect picture of him in her mind.
And that can be a dangerous thing. It puts him on this pedestal, makes it harder to see the actual person.
She's falling for a fantasy, not the complicated, messy reality.
Exactly. And Othello, he kind of knows it too. He says Desdemona had something heard, but not intentively. Like what she knows about him isn't the whole truth, their relationship. It's based on a half-truth.
And that's where things get really messed up. Because that gap in understanding, it's perfect for Iago's lies to take root.
Like he's a gardener, planting seeds of doubt, just waiting for them to grow into something poisonous.
And while that's happening, he's breaking down Othello's self-image piece by piece.
And as that image crumbles, so does Othello's belief in Desdemona, his ability to think clearly. He's losing himself in this web of lies.
Man, this is intense. It's like everyone's trapped in this world where nothing is what it seems. So where do we go from here?
Well, that takes us right into the heart of the tragedy, the play's climax, all because of this inability to see past the surface.
Wait, are you talking about?
Yeah. Othello, totally blinded by jealousy, believing everything Iago's fed him. He does the unthinkable.
He kills Desdemona.
He does. It's heartbreaking. It shows just how destructive jealousy can be, how fragile our perceptions are. But it also makes us ask, what about our lives? How do we deal with this whole appearance versus reality thing?
That's a really good question. Makes you wonder how many times we misinterpret stuff or get caught up in how things look or let our insecurities mess things up.
Yeah, for sure. We'll dig into that more, but first, let's take a quick break. It's like Shakespeare's holding up this mirror, right? Showing us how easily we can be tricked by appearances. Our own, other people's, all of it.
And the consequences, like in Othello, whoa, but he's not just pointing out the problem, is he? There's a warning in there, too, about thinking for yourself, not just accepting what you see.
Yeah, don't just take things at face value. We've got to look past the stories people tell, the personas, and try to get to the real stuff underneath.
It's like we all fall for this confirmation bias, right? Seeing what we want to see, believing what fits our ideas.
Totally. And Othello shows just how dangerous that is. It's like a warning. Don't just assume things, question your biases, try to see the world more clearly.
And that's so relevant even now, centuries later. Crazy, right?
Totally. Think about social media. It's like made for curated personas. Everyone's their best self, just the highlights. Easy to forget there's a real person behind all those filters and clever captions.
Yeah, everyone trying to look successful and happy, even if they're not, makes you compare yourself, feel bad.
Exactly. And that gap between how things look and how they are, that can really mess you up. Anxiety, depression, thinking you're not good enough.
But it's not just online, is it? This appearance versus reality thing, it's everywhere.
Everywhere. Politics, ads, your relationships, there are
Yeah.
always messages trying to change how you see things, to get you to do something. It's more important than ever to really think about what you see and hear, to get different points of view.
So how do we do that? Avoid being like Othello and everyone else. How do we get better at seeing through the BS?
I think it starts with knowing yourself, your own biases, how you tend to judge people based on, like, first impressions.
Gotta check yourself. Ask, am I seeing this person or situation for what it really is? Or is it just my own ideas getting in the way?
That's it. And then be willing to change your mind. Think about other possibilities. Accept that you might be wrong.
Well, there's that saying, the first thought you have is what you've been taught to think. The second thought is who you really are.
I like that. It's about thinking more deeply, not just reacting.
And getting different perspectives, right? Having people around who don't agree with you all the time, who make you see things in new ways.
Definitely. Talking to people, listening to opinions you don't agree with, reading a lot, all of that helps you see the world more clearly.
Like Maya Angelou said, prejudice is a burden that confuses the past, threatens the future, and renders the present inaccessible.
Powerful stuff. And it's Othello all over again. Prejudice, not seeing past the surface, leads to disaster.
It seems like a huge lesson here is about real connection, right? Relationships built on trust and understanding, not on some perfect image.
Absolutely. Because those real connections, when you can be yourself, that's where you find real happiness.
It's about accepting that people are messy and complicated, not getting caught up in trying to be perfect, and knowing that everyone, even those who seem to have it all, has their own stuff going on.
Very well said. And that applies to us today just as much as back then.
So in a world obsessed with image, how do we make sure we're seeing people for who they are, not just what we want to see?
That's the big question, isn't it? Something we all deal with.
Maybe Othello is there to remind us, to be aware of that gap between what we see and what's real for ourselves and everyone else.
Maybe that's the most important thing we can take away from this play.
Like a call to action. Be more aware, think more deeply, and be ready to challenge what you think you know. Dig deeper, ask more questions, connect in a real way.
And remember, the best stuff isn't about looks. It's what's inside that matters.
Wow, I think we just went deep on Othello, and maybe learned something about ourselves along the way.
It's always great to talk about this kind of stuff with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Othello. We hope it's given you some new ways to think about the play, and maybe even about how appearances can be deceiving in your own life.
And until next time, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep looking for the truth behind the surface.
And remember, things aren't always what they seem, so stay curious, friends. You know, it's crazy how, even though Othello is like super old, it still feels so real today.
That's Shakespeare for you. He just got human nature right.
Yeah.
The stuff we all deal with no matter what time period or anything.
We might not have jealous generals chasing us around, but that whole thing about trust, how we see the world, the stories we tell, that's totally us.
It's like we all have those little Iago voices in our heads sometimes, don't we? Whispering all that doubt, making you question everything.
Oh, yeah. So easy to get stuck in those bad thoughts. Like, it can spiral out of control.
For sure. And that's where knowing yourself, that's key. Recognizing those patterns, those little Iagos inside, that's how you start to break free.
So instead of letting the doubts win, you got to face them head on. Challenge them.
Yeah.
And try to, like, replace them with something better, right?
Right. It's about trusting yourself, knowing you're worthy, not letting other people's crap define you.
That's powerful stuff, taking control of your own story, not letting other people write it for you.
And remembering everyone has their own story,
Mhm.
their own struggle. You can't judge someone based on how they look or what's on their Instagram.
Always more than meets the eye. And sometimes the best stories, they're the ones that have been through some stuff. The ones with the scars.
It's those imperfections, that's where you find real strength.
Like kintsugi, that Japanese art where they fix broken pottery with gold,
Yeah.
making the cracks beautiful. Kind of a metaphor for like accepting our flaws, finding beauty in what's broken.
I love that. It's like your flaws, your struggles, they're not something to hide. They're part of you.
It's accepting yourself, the whole package, and then giving other people that same kindness.
Because when you can see past all that surface stuff, the masks people wear, that's when you connect for real.
And that's what makes life good. Those real connections, being vulnerable, that's where you find strength, support, all of that.
So, wrapping up our Othello deep dives here, what are some things you really hope people take away?
Well, number one, looks can be deceiving. Think for yourself, question what you see and hear, get different viewpoints.
And don't forget about your own biases, how you judge people without really knowing them.
It's about self-awareness, making real connections, and embracing all the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of being human.
Well said. Othello might be a tragedy, but it also kind of shows us the way, you know, how to deal with relationships, with a world where things aren't always what they seem.
So to everyone listening, stay curious, keep asking questions, and always try to look deeper.
And remember, the real stuff, the good stuff, it's not about appearances. It's about who we are on the inside.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Othello. Until next time, stay curious, friends.